Good evening, good evening, good evening. Come on in the room, come on in and welcome. I am Pastor Terry Bagley, pastor of the St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church of Pratt City, Alabama, in the great city of Birmingham and in the great state of Alabama. And this is our virtual town hall forum. And we're glad today to have our very special guest sharing with us. It is the great senator of this great state of Alabama, Senator Doug Jones. Senator Jones, welcome, sir. We are
Pastor,
glad to have you as our special guest today.
Pastor, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. It's a busy time for me, for you, for everybody, but it's always great to be with you, and I really appreciate this chance.
Yes, sir. We want to thank you for coming on with us. We know you have a busy schedule. At this time, it's kind of hectic for you, especially being on the campaign trail. And we're wishing you much success in your campaign. And hopefully on November the 3rd, you'll get the kind of outcome that we are all hoping and praying for. I know that since you've been in office, especially these last 2 years, Senator, you have been very busy and introducing and being co-sponsors on a lot of bills that have made great changes in effect here in the state of Alabama. If you would, just for a moment, can you tell us about some of those bills that have been the most effective for the state?
Yeah, thanks for that. When I was elected in 2017, people told me they wanted me to reach across the aisle. They wanted me to get things done, and that's the only way you can do things in the United States Senate is to reach across the aisle, get some of your fellow colleagues in the Democratic caucus. The only way you can pass legislation. I've been a co-sponsor probably on a couple of hundred bills, but out of those, there's been about 22 that I was the lead. I mean, me and a Republican, we kind of wrote the legislation, had the idea, wrote the bill, got it passed by both houses of Congress and signed by President Trump. It does everything from helping farmers. It works with rural health care, trying to streamline all of the federal information about rural health care and putting it into one office. It helps small businesses. We've done things for veterans. One of the best things I've ever done in the Senate was to help widows of our veterans who died as a result of a service-related injury or illness. And they were getting denied benefits. And for 35, 40 years, they'd been denied benefits because their benefits were offsetting to each other. And when I heard about it, I was just stunned. I could not believe that the government was doing that to our veterans' families. They had tried for 20 years to get it overturned, and they couldn't do it. And last year, with some amazing effort, we got that challenged. And we've got that only affected a couple of thousand people in Alabama right now. It will affect more down the road. But it was so important to our veterans and the veteran community to let them know how important the veterans are for us. We've done some banking issues. We're trying to work to make it easier for folks to get credit. But those bills run the gamut from small businesses to veterans and to farmers. And one of the first bills that we did and got passed as a standalone was, you guys know my history as U.S. attorney and working with the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing cases. Well, what I found during those times was that so many of the records were just kind of boxed up and they couldn't be released. And so we did what we call the Civil Rights Cold Case Collection Act of 2018. And we got it passed. It's kind of like the John F. Kennedy assassination records, that they'll be assembled at the National Archives. A commission is going to be appointed to go through them to make sure there's nothing inappropriate or national security interest that needs to be. And those are going to be released. And there's a lot of cases out there that were never prosecuted that the records need to be released on so that the communities, the families, there can be that kind of healing. I saw how important that was to these communities. So it runs the gamut all the way from civil rights cold cases to veterans and farmers and small businesses and banks.
We can certainly say that your record speaks for itself about the great work that you've been continuing to do since you've been in office. Now, with this election that's coming up, there are a lot of issues and concerns that a lot of people across the board have, especially concerning the issues with immigration, concerning the issues with the employment, the unemployment rate, finances, job markets, and so forth, as that is concerned. As you look at the situation that our economy is facing right now, what kind of plans do you have to implement and policies to put in place to help ensure that the people of Alabama have a fighting chance as far as jobs creations are concerned, and being able to that if they are laid off, that those finances and resources are available to them to make sure that they still have a chance to provide for their families?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's a complicated question. The CARES package that we passed is when this pandemic really first started taking hold. Put a lot of extra benefits out there for folks. There was a $1,200 check that went out to folks. There was the unemployment that got extended. It got increased by $600 a week. Got extended for a period of 4 months. There was emergency loans, low interest loans that our businesses could get to try to help them make it through while they were shut down. Those things have got to continue. We knew early in the summer that this virus was not going away, that we were going to continue to have to put money into this economy to keep it afloat. And the fact is, the House of Representatives passed a bill back in May that would have done just that. Now, it was not a perfect bill, and there were things in it I didn't particularly care for, but it had money for unemployment. It had money for the payroll protection program to keep businesses, allowing business to have people on the payroll rather than having them unemployed, and to pay their benefits. It did money for city and county governments, because you see the number of furloughs even the city of Birmingham is having to do at the Art Museum and at the Civil Rights Institute, in different places where they just don't have the budgets. There was money to help them. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it on the Senate floor. And so the plan that we've got now, I believe the plan needs to be to have another package. Every economist that we've talked to says that we need to do that. The Federal Reserve Chairman, Jay Powell, says that we need to put more money into the economy to help individuals and to help businesses, to save lives, to save livelihoods, to put more money into healthcare and testing and contact tracing and vaccines. All that's important. The fact of the matter is, we've got to get this virus under control before we can really focus on expanding the economy. We can save it, and that's what we've been doing. But we've got to get the virus under control. If we want to get back into an economy that seems to be growing and unemployment goes down and stays down, we've got to get this virus under control. That's number one. To do that, though, in addition to the healthcare related part, we've got to put more money into businesses. We've got to help small businesses. We've got to help individuals. We have got a number of bills pending out there that would particularly help minority businesses. It would strengthen the minority serving institutions, the deposit institutions, they call them MDIs, and the community finance deposit institutions, the CFDIs, that would get some money in there to them that they can then get into their minority businesses and communities. We've got to get minority businesses access to capital. That's going to keep them, it's going to let them start, it's going to let them stay afloat. We've got to get people protected. I want to see the unemployment extended. I want to see student loans, a moratorium on student loans. I want to see, we're going to have to deal with a housing crisis if we're not careful, because people that are not employed are going to lose the ability to make mortgage payments and rent payments. So our plan, my plan, is to do what we did with CARES, try to streamline it to make sure it's going to the right people in the right places, get through this pandemic, start getting on the backside of the pandemic, and then start looking at things that we can put money back in the economy, really back into the Treasury, infrastructure bills, broadband is a huge part of that. And it's not just broadband accessibility, it's broadband affordability as well, so that we can help our schools, we can help our businesses. The infrastructure will put money into the treasury, and that's how we expand, and that's how we grow the economy. You know, a lot of people don't really fully appreciate the fact our economy was going so good in large measure because the federal government was putting so many tax dollars in there and helping people. We were doing the kind of things necessary. This was before the pandemic, putting money into the economy. That's why this economy was going so well before the pandemic hit.
Exactly. You made mention of the fact that our school systems and so forth, and hospitals, and all of these local businesses, as far as small businesses are concerned, are greatly affected during this time. And many of the minority small businesses are seeming to be falling by the side simply because they don't have the access to the resources.
Right.
From what figures I've read about, says that at least 55% of small businesses in the minority communities have ended and closed its doors altogether. What plans or policies do we have that we can put in place that can help ensure that the minority small businesses get the help that they need?
Well, let's go back a little bit. We tried to do that in the CARES Act. The payroll protection plan did not do it initially. It was all going to bigger businesses because it was going through the banks. I actually had a plan that would have done that, that would have used the employee tax credits to fund payroll, where they wouldn't have to pay it back. But they decided to do the payroll protection plan instead. And when that started running out of money, we were also seeing that it wasn't getting to the smaller of the small businesses. It's particularly minority businesses. So there was a carve out that we were able to get $60-70 billion to these minority businesses, which was important because it did save a lot of businesses. I think what we've got to start doing now is that we've got to start looking at a bill like I just mentioned, trying to figure out ways that we can create, both working with the Federal Reserve as well as on my seat in the banking committee, areas, Main Street lending programs through the Fed, through the banking system, that would allow for these no interest loans, low interest loans that might even can be forgiven down the road for minority businesses to get the capital they need to start back and to maintain. This is going to be a long process. We're going to be in this pandemic for a while. I worry that the next 6 months are going to be worse than the first 6 months. And so this is not something that we're just, as was said last night, we can't just learn to quote live with it. We got to figure out what we can do, put the money in to save lives, to save these businesses. I think one of the things that we do is my bill that I mentioned a minute ago about the MDIs and the FDIs, so that we can get that capital to these businesses to start back up, open back up. These businesses, a lot of them, I think, are too many of them are closed permanently, but a lot of them can probably open back up if they get the opportunity.
As far as small businesses are concerned, this is kind of sad to say, but I've heard quite a few of your churches have had to close its doors, not just temporarily because of the COVID virus, but they've closed permanently because they didn't have the resources that they needed in order to stay afloat. And so this has not just been an effect on small businesses, but it has had an effect on churches. Right. So what do pastors and churches and congregations do to help ensure that as the numbers continue to rise and people are still fearful of the fact that even going out of the house, we're still making trips to the grocery store, we're still making trips to the gas stations, but a lot of people are still fearful about gatherings. And so what are churches supposed to do during times like this in order to get the kind of help that they may need in order to keep their doors open?
Yeah, that's a tougher issue because of the separation of church and state in the Constitution. Now, in the CARES Act, we did make provisions that churches and nonprofits were created, or not created, but they were treated in a similar manner and could get access to the payroll protection program and to some of the emergency loans. That's about the best we can do. Obviously, we can't do a lot of subsidies and that sort of things because of the constitutional barriers with that. It is a real challenge for churches to do virtual things, to have the technology to do it. And when you don't have folks in the pews, you also can't pass the collection plate. And I get that. Okay. And so I think our churches are going to have to also think a little bit, adjust and think outside the box about ways they can get their flock, their parishioners, to help them and just step up. One of the things that we're trying to do, and we did this in CARES, and I think it's something else that we're going to be looking at, is we want to make sure that contributions can be fully tax deductible, because I think it's important for those who can give to be able to give and to get that tax deduction for it in a full way. I think we're trying to do things to help, but it's also going to be a community effort. There's so many people in this country. There's so many people in Alabama and around. This pandemic has not devastated every business. And there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of people that have really made money off of this. And they need to step up and help. And they need to do those things necessary. And I think there's a lot more outreach that we can do for the faith community.
Definitely, definitely. And we certainly appreciate all the efforts that you have been putting forth in trying to ensure that people everywhere, not just across political lines and not just cross ethnic lines, but you seem to have a heart to want to help everybody, no matter what their ethnical background may be. Because I heard Joe Biden state last night, this is not a red thing and this is not a blue thing. This is a United States thing. Right. But the thing of the matter is that we need to see that kind of philosophy show forth in everything that everybody does, whether you're Republican or Democrat. This is not the time for us to look and see who's right and who's better and who's stronger or who's richer or who's poor. This is about getting people the kind of help that they need, because the simple truth is America at this point in time, with the pandemic that we're dealing with, this economic suppression that we're in, and all of the things that we are fighting against with this COVID virus and not having all the resources that we need. Hospitals are suffering because healthcare workers don't have all the necessary PPE equipment that they need to protect themselves. People are not really taking the virus seriously because you have large groups and gatherings of super spread events, even that are taking place from the White House all the way down to the southern tip of Florida. So it makes no sense on how we are arguing over menial things when we need to come together as a country and understand the fact that we are the people of the United States. So now another issue that we're facing as we get ready to move towards November the 3rd and casting our vote for this election is the fact that voter registration and the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act is something that's been on the table for our community for the longest, and every so often we have to come back to the table to sort of almost beg for the right to continue to vote. And so one of my thinking is that why are we continuing to have to come back to the table every so often to continue to ask for the right to vote, when the right to vote ought to be our constitutional rights. And so, what do we do as a community of people to make sure that, or how do we go about ensuring the fact that we have a right to vote continuously without an expiration date on the Civil Rights Act, Voting Act?
Yeah, it's a great question, but let me tell you, your right to vote doesn't have an expiration date. The right to vote doesn't have an expiration date. What has an expiration date on it is the protections that the law gives you to exercise that right. That's what expires ever so often. And that is based on historical discrimination in the South and other places. With the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965, what that did was put in those protections. It did away with poll taxes. It did away with literacy tests and made sure that those could not be used. But it also gave folks enforcement mechanisms so that their rights to vote were going to be protected. And if they weren't protected, you could go into a court of law and get redress for those. A significant part of that, the Voting Rights Act, what was known as Section 5, Pre-Clearance Act of the Voting Rights, which meant that if a city, a state, a county did things within their jurisdiction that had the potential for impacting in a negative way minority voting, then they were required to go and get approval with the Justice Department before they could implement that. And it was a great deterrent because so many times we saw in Alabama and other places where boundary lines were drawn, changes were made, and those were challenged at the Justice Department under the pre-clearance standard. And they did it before the election, before it went in place. They could challenge that. That's gone now. That was not because legislation lapsed. It was because of a Supreme Court decision called Shelby County versus Holder. Shelby County, Alabama versus Eric Holder, who was then the Attorney General. And what the Supreme Court did was say all of the historical reasons for having the Voting Rights Act and having that pre-clearance really are not there anymore. There's no real rhyme or reason why you have to do that. We've seen Black elected officials. We've made great progress. So that portion of the Voting Rights Act, which was its teeth, was its real strength, is unconstitutional anymore. It goes away. We're going to strip that out. The rest of it remains, and you can enforce it, but after the fact. And so what has been done now is really an enforcement mechanism, and we've got the Voting Rights Act reauthorization. It's now called the John Lewis Voting Rights Enhancement Act of 2019. It is designed to try to put the teeth back into the Voting Rights Act. So states like Alabama and some others with a history of voter suppression can't do it. And they can't do things without getting it pre-cleared through the Department of Justice. And that's where we are. So those are laws that I think are typical, that have to be periodically looked at. But, in something like the Voting Rights Act, it should be easy. It should be an easy thing to do. Unfortunately, it's gotten very political. And I want to make sure that folks understand that. And this is so important for the Senate race in Alabama.
Yes, it is.
Alabama's the birthplace. I mean, we were the cradle of the Voting Rights Act when, John Lewis and Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton and so many others got beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The Voting Rights Act really grew from that. And we're the home. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I've worked to help try to break down the barriers to voting for so long, both in private practice as a lawyer and as U.S. Senator. I'm a co-sponsor. Terry Sewell from Selma and Congresswoman Terry Sewell in the 7th District has been a champion of this, and I've been working with her. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I'm running against a guy who doesn't even know what the Voting Rights Act is. And I'm not talking about that he's opposed to extending it. he doesn't know what it is. And the pastor and I were talking about this. And I want to find this because I want to play this for you. If I can get it back up. My opponent, Tommy Tuberville, was asked at a Birmingham Rotary Club. It's called the Sunrise Rotary. He was asked the question, very simple question. Do you support the extension of the Voting Rights Act? That's all he was asked. Now, a lot of people in Alabama don't support an extending the Voting Rights Act. They think it's run its course. I disagree. I think we still need it. But I want you to listen, if you would. If you'll bear with me, Pastor, if it's okay to do this.
Yes, sir.
But I'd like for folks on this call to listen to this because it's so important, I think, as we go into this final stretch of the election.
Your question, speaking of history taught in school, do you support extension of the Voting Rights Act?
Oh, yeah, the thing about the Voting Rights Act is it's there's a lot of different things you can look at it as. Who's it going to help? What direction do we need to go with it? I think it's important that with everything we do, we keep secure. We keep an eye on it. It's run by our government, and it's run to the point that it's got structure to it. It's like education. I mean, it's got to have structure. Now, for some reason, we look at things to change, to think we're going to make it better, but we'd better do a lot of work on it before we make that change.
That, ladies and gentlemen, that is painful to listen to. That is painful. This guy is the Republican nominee to the United States Senate, and you heard him. He doesn't know what it is. And so that's what's at stake, folks. That's what's at stake here. To somebody that doesn't even know what it is, he ought to be disqualified. But that says it all about Tommy Tuberville.
I think America has already saw what it's like to elect someone with no experience and put them into a position to lead when they have no experience at all. And I hope that Alabama has paid enough attention to what America has done and chooses not to do the same thing. If we're going to do anything, we need to make sure that we continue to use people who has the educational background for the positions that they hold. You wouldn't call your plumber to come in and fix your TV, and you certainly wouldn't send the lawn care guy into the pulpit to save the people, and especially if he hasn't been called by God. And so we want to make sure that in this time that we choose the right people for the right job. And we certainly believe, Senator Jones, that for such a time as this, you are the right man.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's one more thing that I want to talk to you about. When we talked about the Voting Rights Act, so much intimidation is being used to be given. And it is certainly why the Voting Rights Act was brought up. You mentioned that it was used as a tactic of intimidation to keep the African American community from voting. Yeah. And so as we continue to move forward now, especially as it draws closer to this election, we see so many new tactics that are being given to try to intimidate people from voting and to deter people from the polls. So what things are we going to do, especially in the state of Alabama, are we going to do to ensure that people are able to get to the polls to vote without the fear of being intimidated or turned away from the polls?
Well, the first thing we can do right now up until October 29th is go ahead and go vote. In Alabama, you can go to the county courthouse up until October 29th and vote. I was in Jefferson County today. That's my voting sticker. Stood in line for about an hour. Got there kind of early, right before the doors opened, and it was great. There was no intimidation. There was nothing. There was social distance. Everybody had their mask on. They moved it through. Go vote. If you've got any concern at all, whether it is the virus or fear of the weather or fear of being intimidated at the polls, go now. You'll be fine, and your vote will count. So we've got a huge number of people voting early. This is unique for Alabama right now. This voting early, it's still an absentee ballot process. Make sure you take your voter ID, but you can do it, and it is awesome. You can do it. So that's number one. Number two, you can vote an absentee ballot. The security of your home, you just got to make sure you follow the instructions. If you get an absentee ballot application, fill it out. When you get your ballot, they'll give you instructions, and you got to follow it to the T. Dot the I's, cross the T's, put it in the right envelopes, because there's like 3 that you got to deal with, and mail it in. That's number two. At the polls, just be vigilant, because you want to do a couple of things ahead of time. You want to make sure that you are still registered to vote. The Secretary of State has purged voting rolls in the past. We've been trying to contact a lot of people to get them, and have got them re-registered. But make sure you're registered. Make sure you can go online, you can call. Make sure your name hasn't been purged. It's really easy to get back on if you have, but check. That's number one. Number two, check your voting place. Make sure it's still going to be there and it's open. Sometimes they've closed them at the last minute. We don't want you to have to go somewhere, take time off work, go to one polling place only to be told you have to go somewhere else. Then you got to stand in line, and you may give up and get frustrated. So find out your polling place so you can go straight there. And the other thing, as at the polling spot, just be vigilant. Hopefully we're not going to see any voter intimidation. We've seen it in the past. Don't worry. Do not let people that are not poll workers ask you for your ID, ask you if you're registered, ask you what your name is. You just ignore them. Only the people at the poll workers will ask for your voter ID when you get up to the front of the line ready to vote. So if anybody comes and tries to talk to you and ask to see your ID, ask your name, do you voting in the right place, just ignore them. If you need to, call somebody. There may be poll watchers from our campaign there, but call somebody if you feel the least bit threatened. There's a hotline that I hope we can get to you about voter intimidation. I don't have it right off, and I apologize, but we can get that. We can get that hotline to you, Pastor. Make sure
we'll
people
be sure to post that number up on our Facebook page later.
Yeah.
That you provide. Once you get me that information, we'll be sure to post that on our Facebook page at a later date. That if you experience intimidation at the polling place, please let us know and call that number so that we can get it to the proper authorities.
Right.
Sister Charlene Weeks had a question. She wanted to know what are your thoughts on the problems with of voting interference from foreign countries?
Huge problem, major problem. The President of the United States is ignoring the problem. He's not doing anything about it. He's in fact encouraged it on occasions publicly. Now some of his people, the FBI, NSA, and others are working on it. I worry that the administration is not doing all they can. It is happening every day. We saw just this week, it was released that Iran was able to hack into and get voter identification data and send emails in the name of the Proud Boys, which is this white supremacist group. And what we see right now with the interference is not as much hacking into the voting machines, but that's coming. What we're seeing right now is just the disinformation campaigns. What's happening out there is that Russians and Chinese and North Koreans, especially, and the folks from Iran, they're sowing the seeds of hate and division on social media, all lies, all untruths. That's what we've got to be careful about. Big tech companies are stepping up to try to monitor that better, but we've got a real big issue. Don't be surprised if you see other things coming up in the next 11 days, more things to be on the lookout for. We've got in our campaign, we do a lot of Twitter, and we've got a program that monitors the Twitter, because we were back in 2017, and I haven't gotten reports about it now, but back in 2017, we were having to knock out 30 and 40,000 Russian Twitter bots a day that were coming in and saying stuff, doing things, just ridiculous stuff. We haven't seen too much of that, and Twitter's done a better job of getting rid of them, but it is still a problem. It's got to be a priority for the next administration. It should be a priority for Congress. It has got to be a priority for the next administration.
So what do the undecided voter who has yet to cast their ballot, what fears, that they might have during this time when they hear things like this with foreign interference, poll intimidation? How do they have the assurance, one, that their vote is going to make the difference during this election?
Well, first of all, use reliable news sources. When you start seeing these really inflammatory things, if it just doesn't sound right, it's not. Okay. I mean, all of this, remember Pizzagate with Hillary, that were the allegations about Hillary Clinton and all in 2016. Those are just so outrageous. Don't believe them. Don't believe this QAnon kind of stuff. Go to reliable sources. Go to people that your local news media. They may be a little biased, but they're not going to give you just disinformation about things. That's number one. And so be very careful about what you see on social media. I think it's important that folks kind of exercise their own judgment. Be careful about what you post, and that could be picked up and or misinterpreted. Those are the things to do. But I would tell folks to don't let that deter you. Learn about the issues. Every candidate's got a website that is pretty solidly protected. Mine's DougJones.com. I ain't gonna tell you who my opponent is. You can find it out for yourself if you want to know. But go to those websites, learn about the issues, see what people are saying. Listen to your local news and see if the candidate is speaking to the news media and what they're saying. You can tune in to the certified ones, like mine is. I've got a Twitter at Doug Jones. We've got a campaign headquarters Twitter, which is Doug Jones HQ. Those are kind of verified, and you can follow that a little bit to get your information. But by all means, do not get deterred. Get whatever you can, make the decisions, however you make them, and get out to vote. Please exercise that right to vote.
Senator Jones, I have two more questions. One that comes from an audience member. They wanted to know, why are the Republican representatives and senators so afraid of Trump to the point of endorsing him, even when they know he is blatantly wrong?
It's purely political survival right now. Donald Trump has captured the Republican Party. He has a very solid base out there. And we saw something similar happen, if you think about it, in Alabama. We saw something very similar happen with Roy Moore. Roy Moore had a very solid base that followed him, that supported him, that would just, support him all the time. And so many of the Republican candidates over the last years, since when Moore was popular, he's kind of taken his horse sassy and ridden off into the sunset now. But they didn't want to alienate the people that were his supporters. So many, Donald Trump has got a very strong base out there that supports him. And they don't want to alienate that base because of political survivorship. And so their political survival means more, in my opinion, than their integrity. We had people of conscience in the Senate when I first got there that stood up and spoke out in tough places. Jeff Flake from Arizona, Bob Corker from Tennessee, and they retired because they knew that they were not likely to win a Republican primary because that's a smaller pool of voters. And when that base turns out for Trump, and he, same thing happened to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions had been in Alabama politics for, 30 years or more. And look what happened to him. So there's just, it's political survivorship. And it's unfortunate. We know we need more men and women of character and courage than just simply political survivors.
Yes, sir. Yes, we do. One of the last issues I want to talk to you about today is one that our community faces that is filled with fear and anger. And that is the racism that is going on in this country. The spread of hate and discord that even comes from the top office all the way down. There's a fear because of our livelihood. Young Black men that are fearful that they don't get to live past certain ages because you might get pulled over. And if you get pulled over, you run the risk of being shot for no apparent reason. I've heard a lot of coworkers say to me sometimes that, that if we just follow the rules, but one of my responses to them is, have you ever been pulled over simply for just being Black? If you've ever been pulled over simply just for being the color of your skin, then you will never understand what we experience, and you've done a lot of work for the civil rights movement. I know this firsthand from the work that me and my local chapter with SCLC back in Anniston, when me and Dr. Nimrod Reynolds and Charles Steele used to come to your office. And so I remember the days of when you were working on the case dealing with the 16th Street bombing. And so I know what work you've done personally in the civil rights movement. But in this day, there is so much hate that is being spread abroad. And we can see, we've known it for years that systematic racism has existed. So if you were re-elected, what kind of policies are you going to put in place to ensure that systematic racism comes to an end, and that when our young men and women are presented before the judiciary systems, that we can have the assurance that we're going to receive a fair trial?
Yeah, great question. Another complicated question. It goes deep. First thing to answer your question is not about policies. It's just about standing up and speaking out, and making sure that I use the U.S. Senate office as a bully pulpit to call racism out when I see it, to fight against it when I see it, and to make sure that we do those things necessary that we can move forward. I've done that as a U.S. Senator. I've talked about it. I've talked about Black Lives Matter on the floor of the United States Senate. I've done those kind of things to stand up and speak out, to do what my old friend John Lewis said was to cause a little bit of trouble. So that's the first thing. Before you can start enacting policies, you got to have folks in the position of getting things done to recognize the problem and then stand up and speak out. And I think so many in America recognize the problem, but they don't always stand up and speak out. And that's what we got to do. We can do that in part by voting. We can make the changes necessary by voting, or we can keep folks like Doug Jones in place to try to work on those changes going forward. Voting, John Lewis said it best. Voting is the most powerful instrument for nonviolent change. The most powerful instrument, the most powerful nonviolent instrument for change that we have in this country. We got to exercise it. We've got to exercise it individually and collectively in great numbers. And when we do that, we can have those voices that are going to be on the floor of the Senate and in the House of Representatives, in the governor's office, in the state legislature, that can stand up and speak out and do those things and craft those policies. We've got to have law enforcement reform. I helped with a criminal justice reform. I got so, I just wanted to throw a shoe at the television listening to Donald Trump last night talk about all the things he's done for Black Americans. The First Step Act, which I was a co-sponsor of, that he got on board late, and it was only because his son-in-law Jared Kushner pushed him. For funding for HBCUs that I was the champion of with Lamar Alexander and a couple of senators, Kamala Harris, that he just signed a bill. That's all he did. He didn't call me. Wasn't calling senators saying get this done. I was on the floor making that happen. I get off. Those are the things that we got to work on. And the things that we can do is that we're going to have to deal with law enforcement and to make sure that we talk to law enforcement, because we cannot defund the police. That is not appropriate. We're not going to do that. We need to get more funds to train law enforcement to do those things necessary, that they can weed out those folks that are in that department that creates this problem. We can do things to de-escalate events. We can have more transparency when it comes to abuse of force investigations, and we can have greater punishment for abuse of force violations. We can do those things, but we've also got to look at healthcare, housing, the economic opportunities that we talked about earlier. I have always, a long time, I have been one to say we need to be removing Confederate battle flags and monuments to places of history and not public significance. We need to move those and bring those down. But I've also said, don't get distracted by moving a piece of granite, because we got barriers to move. We got barriers to bring down that are the laws of this country. So if I'm back there in the United States Senate, and I fully intend to be, we're going to be working on bringing down those barriers in housing and economics and healthcare, even barriers within our military. One of the things I talk about all the time on the Armed Services Committee is creating opportunities for minorities to advance in the officer corps, because every branch will tell you that they are deficient in diversity among officers in our military. So it's those kind of things and those kind of policies that we're going to be putting forth over the next 6 years. But we've also got to vote. We've got to have an administration that wants to do that thinks it's important, that knows it's important, and will help along with the process and not do what we see now, festering the hate, divisive rhetoric. We need to have somebody that's a uniter and a healer. I believe Joe Biden is that guy.
Thank you so much. We've got a long way to go in healing between our communities and the police department itself. And so with the work that is ahead of us, it can only begin when we start to think of ourselves as one. My church will tell you that I often quote to them that in order for us to say that we love God, we've got to say that we love our fellow man. Right. So how can you say that you love God and hate that which God has created? In order for us to live together in this world, in order for us to be able to solve all of our problems, we've got to learn to do it together. Senator Jones, I want to thank you for this opportunity for coming to us today to share your thoughts with us on a lot of the issues that we're facing. We will wish you much luck and success during your campaign. We're pulling for you. We hope that everything on November the 3rd comes out your way and ours as well. And so I want to give you these last few minutes that we have left to be able to say to anybody out there listening, to any undecided voters, just about who you are and what kind of changes you want to make for the great state of Alabama and for our country. Well,
thank you, Pastor. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come in today. you know, I really want folks to look at my record. For the last 2.5 years, I think if you look at my record, don't listen to the ads on TV that if there are certain issues that bother you, because it's probably a lie. It's really sad the way that the Republican Party in Alabama and Tommy Tuberville have resorted to so many false statements and false lies that are out there. Look at my record. Look at what I've done over the last 2.5 years, and even before. My record as a lawyer in Birmingham, my record as a prosecutor and a U.S. attorney here in the great city of Birmingham. I believe I've been that voice for you. You may not agree with me on everything, but I've been that voice. I've been that voice to help our communities. I've been that voice to give hope to so many people who have not found that hope and seen that hope. It's not about me, but it's about you. I've been your senator. This is not just a job for me. It's a calling. It's a service that I do. And I'm guided by my faith and my belief that we have more in common than we have to divide us. And I absolutely believe, I see it every day. You know, when I go around this state, I always talk about the fact that we're in this historic moment that we talked about a few minutes ago. I give the same basic speech to the Huntsville, Alabama Chamber of Commerce that I gave to the HBCU rally last week. And always end it with the same thing about the moment that we're in right now, to make sure people stand up and recognize that we've had these multi-generational failures to fully achieve the equality across the spectrum, business, health, everything that our country was founded on, to live up to that ideal. To fulfill that dream, as Dr. King would say, to fulfill that dream, you got to have people that's going to be willing to stand up, to risk their political future, to do whatever, stand up for what's right. I think I've done that. I think my votes are matters of principle, and I've done that for you, and I will continue to do that. I ask for your help. I ask for your vote, and anything that you can do to help me get across the finish line, because when you do, I will have you back for another full 6-year term. So thank you so much, Pastor, for letting me be with you today. Really enjoyed it. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you, sir. For everyone watching, those of you who wanted that number to the protection hotline is there on the screen. It was given to us by your assistant, Terry Chapman. The voter protection hotline number is there at the bottom of the screen. You can see it there, that if you have any problems at the poll where you're experiencing any kind of intimidation, if you'll just call that hotline number, it will get that to the proper authorities to let them know, so that we can make sure that no one experiences intimidation and have the right to go in and freely cast their vote without any problems. And so thank you again, Senator Jones, man. We really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. And we may be calling on you again, especially after November the 3rd, so we can celebrate.
Yes, sir. Anytime. Y'all take care.
Amen.
Be healthy. Please wear your mask.
Amen. Amen. Please do that. Whatever you do during this time, please make sure that you take all the necessary precautions to stay safe. I know the numbers are rising, and I know our president likes to pretend that just around the corner we're taking a turn and everything is going to be all right, and the virus itself is going to disappear. But listen to the health care providers who are telling you the truth about this. Please make sure you do what is necessary to stay safe. May God bless you. May God keep you. Thank you for joining us today. It is our hope and prayer that you be blessed during this time. Thank you all so much.